These are the worst selling cars in the USA. So Case, it's the start of July 2024, and we have the sales numbers for the first half of the year. And what are we talking about today?
Well, every car on this list has sold less than 1,000 units since the beginning of the year. So these, like you said, are the worst sellers from these brands. And on this list of cars that have sold less than 1,000, we've got 7 vehicles to talk about.
Right, so kind of a large number of vehicles. And if you want to check out the list of the best and worst selling cars of 2024, head over to TFL Car and you can find the whole list categorized there by brand. But Case, we're going to start out with number 7, the Lexus RC. They have sold 941 RCs in the first half of 2024. And when you consider they sold nearly 55,000 Lexus RXs, that's not a lot of units.
Funny enough, though, 941 RCs is actually 12% up from where it had been. So it's an improvement.
Pretty crazy that they sold fewer RCs in 2023 and then they brought it back for another model year. So the Lexus RC is a 2-door coupe, and you can get it with a V8 or a V6. There's a bunch of different flavors of them. But one of the trends we're seeing on this list is that sports cars simply aren't selling in very large quantities.
Yeah, and for a little bit more context, some vehicles this year, like the CR-V, for example, have sold over 196,000 units. Or if you look at the RAV4, 248,000 units. So 941 from the Lexus RC is a very small number. It's also worth noting that with this list, we're specifically talking about cars, not trucks.
Yeah, great point. So number 6 on the list of vehicles that have sold less than 1,000 units so far this year, the BMW Z4. And what's so interesting about this is some of the cars are on this list because it's clear they're really old or they're being discontinued, or maybe there's like a new model coming in after the current version, like it's near a facelift. The Z4 has got a manual transmission on its way, but the car is not being discontinued. It's just kind of trucking along. And how many have they sold so far?
928 units, which is actually 17% down from last year. So not a great number. And that's compared to their best-selling car, the X3, at 34,000 units.
And both of the brands of Lexus and BMW are proof of why these manufacturers are not building more enthusiast cars. So we online constantly complain about wanting manual transmissions in 2-doors in sports cars and convertibles, but realistically, these numbers just don't justify new generations of these models. So look, the best selling for both Lexus and BMW are both smallish crossovers, and the sports car stuff just isn't moving.
A lot of the worst selling cars on this list are more interesting than their best sellers. If you look at Mazda, the Miata sold 5,500 units, and the CX-5, their best seller, sold 70,000.
Easily 10 times. Yeah, pretty wild. So next up, we have Acura with the new all-electric ZDX, 338 sold.
Now, to be fair, those did go on sale this quarter, not long ago.
Yes, so it's still a new vehicle, so we gotta let it kind of flush itself out over the next few months to see how the new all-electric Acura performs. Keep in mind, ZDX is based on a GM platform, right?
Yeah, it's an Ultium platform vehicle. You can see some of the similarities to even the Honda Prologue, which is also on that same platform. But Acura's bestseller would be the RDX, which sold 20,000 units. So still modest compared to some of the big sellers that we see on this list, like the CR-V and like the RAV4. But a big difference so far, at least with the ZDX to the RDX. But again, we got to see how the ZDX goes over time.
Now, next stop, Case, coming in at number 4, so pretty big jump once again, is the Toyota Mirai. So this is a hydrogen-powered vehicle that is gorgeous, based on the Lexus LS. In a lot of cases, these hydrogen-powered vehicles come with tens of thousands of dollars of free fuel credits, but they only sold 245 Mirais since the beginning of the year.
Which is 86% down from where it was compared to last year. And that sounds very dramatic, and 245 units is not a lot of units. But of course, there's pretty limited use cases and especially limited areas where you can use a hydrogen-powered car. So actually, we in Colorado now have some locations, or at least a location, where we can fill up a hydrogen-powered car, but that's a more recent thing. We haven't had that until pretty recently.
And as I understand, Case, it's not open to the public.
Really?
So it's for
didn't know
scientific,
that.
scientific research, right? Some of the science organizations do have a station here in Colorado, but you're exactly on the money. There's something like 40 something hydrogen stations in California. And I just remember over the years, these manufacturers have promised, like by next year, we're going to have 48, the year after 100 and 200. It just hasn't happened. In fact, the number of stations is starting to dwindle in California. So the car is beautifully engineered, comfortable to drive, and looks great. But if you simply cannot refuel, folks are just not going to line up and buy that car.
No, it just doesn't make sense for most people. Now, number 3 on this list is the Fiat 500e. Like the ZDX, this is a new model, very recently released. So far they've only sold 204 units. But compared to their bestseller, it's 266 units sold for the 500X, which is 4% down. Not a huge difference year over year, but not a really substantial difference between the 500E and the 500X. Those vehicles, I wouldn't be surprised if after a little while switch places.
Well, what we're noticing is like 500X, I mean, I think last year they sold under 1,000 of them. And I don't think there's a 2024 model year of the 500X. You might still be able to find them out in inventory as people are buying them.
Yeah.
But it's just such a teeny tiny number of vehicles, considering that like the competition of the 500X vehicles like the, let's say like the Honda HR-V, the Toyota Corolla Cross, those sell in tens of thousands of units, and the 500X couldn't even muster 1,000. Which is crazy over the course of a whole year.
Yeah.
So really limited production. Granted, an older platform, but Fiat's got a really kind of a tough place in the USA where they're currently banking everything on this electric city car.
Yeah.
Which we drove and I liked.
Yeah.
But it's too expensive. It's like $34,000.
It is, and limited range, obviously limited space, so you'll have to have a very particular use case to be able to use this car practically. So, yeah, but it's a fun EV.
Yeah,
and great looking.
So number 2, maybe not a surprise, but it's the Nissan GTR.
Yeah, this is a very niche vehicle. It's also a vehicle that hasn't been updated enough recently because it feels pretty ancient at this point, and they just get more expensive over time. So they've only sold 151 units of the GTR.
And I think they recently announced that it's finally being put out of its misery. But I mean, this car's been around. I think production started in 2007.
Yeah, and it's still the same basic vehicle.
Yeah, 2007 for I think the 08 model year. So it's going on 16, 17 years old. Problem with the GTR is when it launched, I think it was under 100K.
Yeah,
it was really good value. But now, like, you can't get into one for under $200,000. Granted, it's been facelift and, you know, you're like the Nismo versions, but still fundamentally the same car. It makes sense when there's only 151 sold.
Yeah, and that's 30% down compared to last year versus the Nissan Rogue, which is their best-selling car, and 141,000 units by comparison. So big difference from 150 to 140,000.
And number 1 on the list, we're going back to the world of hydrogen, the Hyundai Nexo. How many sold, Case?
77. So they didn't
even
quite
break
crack
100.
100. Yeah, and again, for the same reasons like we were talking about with the Mirai, it's just a limited market for hydrogen vehicles like this. But Nexo is a pretty cool car.
Yeah, I've driven one. I've driven one up to the top of Pikes Peak. It really sorted vehicle. Another vehicle that I don't think is a 24 model year here in the US. I mean, the thing about the Nexo is, and the Mirai, is they're such sorted vehicles, right?
Yeah.
They don't feel like science projects when you drive them. They're really well integrated. It feels very safe. The technology feels very sorted. You don't hear about them exploding or catching fire, or maybe because there's only 77 of them. But
Yeah.
I mean, you see a few of them in California and they're really good. The thing about these cars, Case, is because there's so few hydrogen stations, they're really expensive, brand new. Let me see what the base price is on a Nexo. Over 60 grand. And then
Yeah.
they just give you so much money in hydrogen. And then on the used market, like a Mirai, current generation, often under 20 grand. And that's over a $60,000 car brand new. So a year
Yeah.
or two old, under 20,000. So the only way people are buying these is through leases. They just lease them because it's crazy lease deals. But it was such a good idea. But the only way hydrogen is going to work is if one of these automakers develops their own hydrogen infrastructure like Tesla did with supercharging.
Yeah, it's just lacking the infrastructure, basically.
It just doesn't work without the infrastructure. And if Toyota were to pair up and said, we've got $3 billion to build these stations across the US, set up the supply chains, yeah, the cars would do great because they're awesome. They're really cool. But until that happens, there's going to be double-digit car sales in the US.
Yeah. And once again, by comparison, Hyundai's best seller would be the Tucson, 92,000 units. Still a little down from last year, but a big difference to 77.
So some other highlights on this list I just want to mention quickly. R8 sold 266, but that was discontinued pretty early in the year, so we didn't really want to talk about it because it didn't have a whole 6-month period of sales. Same thing with like the Mini Clubman. They sold 730. And then, the funny thing about these sales is sometimes there are folks that will find a car on the lot that hasn't been sold for years and years and years. So like this year, Dodge sold a Viper, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's been gone for a ton of years. They also sold a few Caravans, even though those have been gone for a bunch of years. So folks will find them on the lots, and then they'll still buy them, and because they haven't been sold, it's still considered a new car.
But this list, we focused, again, on vehicles that are still currently being manufactured and sold.
Yeah, for the most part, exactly. Well, folks, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. What do you think of these low sales numbers? And check out Patreon if you want to find behind-the-scenes footage and early access to some of this stuff. But folks can go over to Alt TFL as well, where you find all our videos.
Thanks for watching.
See you next time.